Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. A few quick housekeeping points. There is an exit over there. Sorry. There is an exit over there, and there's the way out that you came in should anything untoward happen. Those the more observant amongst you will have noticed that I am not in scarlet this evening because I do not wish to melt. Anybody else who wishes to take off any jackets, outer garments, or other restrictive things like ties, please feel free to do so. And if the meeting goes on too long, you may see a gentle striptease from the platform, although I hope to avoid it. It is really nice to be back here in our council chamber. And as I'm sure you are aware, these meetings will be webcast and recorded as is our usual practice. I'm sure we all remember to raise your hands when wishing to speak, and obviously operating your own microphones. Members, I remind you, you may only speak once on each item, and speeches are limited to a maximum of 4 minutes. May I say, it is not mandatory to fill the 4 minutes, neither should it be a target, and I hope we can have a fairly crisp debate. That said, let's move on to item 1. Apologies for absence, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've received apologies from councillors Roger Blishen, Steve Cosser, Simon Deere, Brian Edmonds, Jan Floyd Douglas, John Gray, Anna James, Robert Knowles, Julia Potts, Anne-Marie Rosamond, Steve Williams, and Kika Miralles.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Item 2, the minutes of our annual council meeting held on the 17th of May this year. Are there any errors of fact that need to be changed? In that case, councillors, can I have your approval to sign them at a later date?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Item 3, declarations of interest. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Annie Wrighton and Graham Clark have declared an interest in item 12 on the agenda and will leave the chamber for the duration of that item.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. There are some sensitive items on the agenda today. Are there any other late declarations of interest? Thank you very much, councillors. That brings us to item 4, Mayor's announcements. Firstly, can I welcome recently elected Councillor Julian Spence to his first council meeting, and I trust you will find it interesting, educational and informative. Or one of those 3. Secondly, may I, on behalf of myself and the council, congratulate Councillor Liz Townsend on the award of the British Empire Medal in the Queen's Birthday Honours List for her services to Cranley. She is a pocket dynamo who, among other achievements, was a founding member of the Cranley Civic Society, and during the COVID-19 pandemic established the Street Champions to support vulnerable people in the area. And I think it would be nice if we all showed our appreciation. So, what's the mayor been up to? I've been very fortunate to be elected to this office in Jubilee year. And as this event has been widely celebrated throughout the country, the borough and elsewhere, and events have extended beyond what was called Jubilee Week, continually. I went to another event, in fact, last week. It's very noticeable also that many groups who have been engaged in catch-up meetings of things which have been postponed earlier. And it's warming to see that people in general appear to be so glad that the restrictions on liberty have been removed, that they are flocking out to events which otherwise they might have found too boring to attend. Their eagerness to get out and meet other people face to face rather than stare at a small screen at home is palpable and refreshing. This has resulted in my attending 45 events since I took on the borough chain, and that was in the borough outside. I won't regale you with details of all 45, but there is a couple I would like to pick out and just take you through. For me, the outstanding event was my civic service, which, as you'll have seen from the press release, was attended by over 100 people, a bishop, a dozen mayors, chairs and substitutes from across Surrey and Hampshire. There would actually have been 14, but 2 of them came down with COVID in the morning, as did our chief executive, who I sadly missed. But I managed to arrange a very quick substitute to read his lesson. I felt it was an outstandingly good service, but I suppose I'm slightly biased being the centre of attention. But I really would like to thank Alice and Becky for all their hard work. I think it was an outstanding showpiece for Waverley, and I have had loads and loads of people come back to me, mayors, members of the public, saying what a good service it was and how excellent the food was. So I think it was a very good hallmark for how Waverley does things. One of the more interesting events I went to was the Ahmadiyya Muslim celebration of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, which was held at their headquarters situated in Tilford at what they call Islamabad. I was very fortunate, as after a private tour of the Mubarak Mosque, along with the Lord Lieutenant, and strangely enough, the MP for Woking, I was granted the privilege of a personal audience with His Holiness Mirza Mazur Ahmed, their worldwide leader. It was a very interesting conversation, and he was all on about how nice their mosque was, and I could tell him that I actually chaired the planning committee that gave the approval for it. So I shot up in his estimation. He gave me this rather chunky and very beautiful crystal 3D of the Mubarak Mosque, which is really well made, which will adorn the mayor's desk in the mayor's parlour, certainly for my year, and then may well find its way into our trophy cabinet in the hall, or stay on the mayor's desk if he has a lot of papers to weigh down. But it really was an excellent present. After that, I did a question and answer session with their worldwide TV channel, and then went into dinner with over 400 people from all around. They invited loads and loads of their neighbours, and they seemed to be well appreciated by their neighbours, which is always quite interesting. And there were 400 of them there, which I again had to give another speech, thanking them for what they did with the community. Apart from that, there have been many Jubilee celebrations, civic services, high sheriffs and Surrey Mayor's garden parties, and as well as visiting the 4 main population centres, I've also been to some of our smaller settlements, such as Ewhurst, Milford, Tilford, Elstead and Chiddingfold, the leader of whom told me very firmly that they weren't a small place, they were the largest parish in Waverley, and I should give them due respect, which I shall do in future. One comment that really got through to me, it was quite interesting. It was a throwaway comment by someone talking about a particular village in Waverley, and if I may quote them, she said, "They have never seen a Waverley mayor." And that reminded me that our towns have their own mayors and chairs who go to local events, but many of our smaller settlements and villages may feel neglected. I've been kind of busy, so I'm not actively seeking for work, but if you were a councillor representing any of these smaller places, do encourage them, if they have some significant event, to invite the mayor, because it may well help, and the smaller places, it may help them more than some of the other places that I've been to. So thank you. That's all I have to say about mayoral events. Now to council business. I do not think any of us enjoy overlong meetings, and I feel it is very difficult to come to considered conclusions at 11 o'clock at night after listening to hours of debate, however entertaining some parts of it may be, particularly in some of the uncomfortable environments where we've had to be. Our next meeting is in October, where when the nights are drawing in, and I'm seriously considering starting that one at 6 o'clock as an experiment to see if it works and to see how it fits in with everybody. Also, I'm sure you would all like to avoid a recurrence of our 7+ hour marathon spread over many days. I will do all I can to speed up these things by looking carefully at the agenda. And in this chamber, it's very much easier to chair meetings than it is when people are right at the back of some of these darker halls that we've been to. However, I would ask for your help during debates to avoid to try and be concise whilst making your points, and please to avoid continuous repetition of what's gone before. I would also stress that this applies to executive announcements, which should be restricted to giving out useful information about items not on the agenda, and should be brief and not stray into policy matters. Another thing that seems to have expanded is questions. And I note that the preambles to many of our questions are getting longer and longer and longer, necessitating answers getting longer and longer and longer. And I wonder if perhaps we could sharpen up our questions for the future. I do realize we're now effectively in an election year, and today is unique, being the hottest day ever. In fact, UK apparently is the hottest place on the planet. The weathermen are dancing for joy because they got it right, but the rest of us are suffering a little. However, perhaps we can cool things down a little by avoiding personal criticism of others and sticking to what we are here for, debating matters on our agenda and making decisions for the benefit of our residents. Please avoid numerous interruptions and spurious points of order, which are simply there for breaches of law or our rules of debate, and not about others' behavior. Please trust me to deal with that. I appreciate I've not set a particularly good example of brevity, but I hope that these reasonable requests will form the basis of the way we do business and will make the remainder of the year an easier and happier time for us all. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item, which is Leader's announcements. Leader.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members, and can I also take this opportunity to welcome my new colleague and group member, Councillor Julian Spence. We continue to assist refugees from Ukraine, and we continue to have the highest numbers of guests and hosts within Surrey. Members will also be aware of a special executive session held yesterday to pursue a judicial review against the Secretary of State for Levelling Up in regards to the UCOG matter. This matter was considered under the constitutional provisions for urgent matters, and it's my understanding that a more formal report for noting on this matter for members will be presented at the next full council as per those constitutional provisions. I would like to thank all of the team here at Waverley for their hard work in keeping our services running as smoothly as possible during this fairly relentless heat. And I would urge members to continue their fantastic communications to their residents on this, and in particularly regards to the prevention of fires. We've had a number of fires over the last few days, particularly at Frensham and a number of other places. I'm not entirely sure yet as to the cause, but certainly it is worth reminding all residents and all groups that there are actions that they can take to mitigate any impacts from this. And of course, just to very quickly finish, as you'll be hearing quite a lot from me tonight with this agenda, we do have a few members who can't be here tonight this evening. We've clearly got a little bit of a rise in COVID cases and self-isolation from COVID. And I would just like to say that many of those members could have meaningfully contributed remotely, as they did for almost 2 years. And whoever the new Secretary of State is in September, I shall be writing to them, asking them to renew our pleas for remote council sessions to be legal and lawful for those members who could otherwise have contributed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll now move over to the rest of the executive, who, of course, I have communicated your request for brevity to, starting with Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Leader, and good evening, everyone. I'd like to say a few words about the Farnham Infrastructure Programme. Last week kicked off the first public consultation of the Farnham Infrastructure Programme, where all Farnham residents will have the opportunity to have their say on some proposals for Farnham's town centre. The proposals include the widening of pavements in Downing Street and Castle Street, as well as changing the traffic flows in some roads that are currently one-way to become two-way. This would prevent vehicles from having to circulate unnecessarily around the town. There will also be the opportunity to have a look at ways to improve the A31 corridor that runs and dissects Farnham, with improvements to the Cox Bridge and Shepherd and Flock roundabouts, as well as 3 different options for Hickley's Corner, which will provide improved connectivity between the south of Farnham and the town centre. A leaflet has been circulated to all households in Farnham with details of the consultation, which has its own website where comments can be made. However, printed documents will be available from Farnham Town Council. In addition, There will be a series of public exhibitions being held this month, starting actually last Saturday at the Farnham Maltings, the Bush Hotel tomorrow, and the Farnham Leisure Centre at the weekend. The consultation will run throughout the summer and closes on Sunday, the 11th of September. At Stop Press, as it says here, the consultation has been extended to the first week in October to allow for students returning from their holidays to make comments as well. So, thank you, Leader.
Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. I can't talk quite as fast as the Leader, Mr. Mayor, but I will be as brief as I can. The review of enforcement continues across the whole council, but that can't be implemented until the appointment of the 12 new heads of service in October. As I've said before, much good work goes on behind the scenes in enforcement, but we can't often talk about it because of the sensitivity of it, and sometimes it involves court cases. But I'd just like to mention briefly, because it's gone down very well on social media, and I mentioned at the last executive, that the council recently offered issued a fixed penalty notice against a motorist who was observed in a dash cam throwing rubbish out of his vehicle. And as I say, that's gone down very well apparently in social media. In terms of Brightwells, work continues on the Brightwells scheme and should be largely, on the commercial side, should be largely completed this year, although the cinema won't be complete until around March or April of next year. The only other thing I would like to mention is that in terms of the commercial side, we have a Brightwells board meeting this Friday, where we should hear from Chris Nicholson and from Surrey County Council what's happening in terms of the letting out of the shops and restaurants to commercial tenants. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Penny Marriott.
Thank you, Leader. Since I will be presenting an agenda item later on, which is about equality, diversity and inclusion, I'll save my expressions till then. Thanks.
Councillor Merriweather.
Leader, good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everybody. I've got 2 items later, so I'm just going to be very quick. I can't resist another opportunity to plug the discretionary element of our council tax energy rebate scheme. The scheme is to support households who are in need but are not eligible for the original £150 council tax rebate, which was targeted at properties in council tax bands A to D. Residents living in properties in council tax bands E to H may still qualify for the discretionary scheme and are encouraged to check online at our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. Councillor Palmer.
Since I'll be speaking on a couple of items later on, I don't wish to try the Mayor's patience, so I have nothing to say.
As ever wise. Councillor Rivers.
Thank you, Leader. Mr. Mayor, I take this opportunity to thank officers and colleagues for their support during the short holiday that the councillors Rivers enjoyed. But perhaps more seriously, I take the opportunity to thank officers for their very rapid response in supporting and resettling some of the vulnerable residents in St James Court after the fire on Sunday evening. St James Court is a short walk from Farnham Fire Station, but they were already on a call and neighbouring stations attended after 25 minutes. For those who are not aware, St James Court is one of our properties. It's comprised of 16 one-bed sits, 5 of which are leased, 11 council-owned, 6 of which are managed by ethical lettings. So a terrific effort by our officers to help out very quickly. And we await a report from the fire brigade. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rivers. And finally, Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I add my huge congratulations to Councillor Julian Spence and I very much look forward to working with him. As most of you know, we are currently holding the examination of Local Plan Part 2 here in the Chamber. Some of you may be watching online, and obviously if you're bored one evening, you can catch up on YouTube. I'd like to thank the Planning Policy team for all their hard work over this week so far, and obviously last week as well. And my grateful thanks to the maintenance team who sorted out the air conditioning so it wasn't unbearably hot in here. We're also currently consulting on the Climate Change and Sustainability SPD, which goes until the 29th of July. And on a day like this, it's never highlighted more the need for planning legislation to catch up with the very real and existential threat of climate change. Our new planning pre-application service has been launched. This offers 3 service levels designed from individual homeowners to major developments. Fees will be fairer and reflect the actual cost of providing the service, and this ends what was effectively a subsidy for major developers. Film Waverley, as Kika is not here today, I would like to say was yet another project by this administration, was a successful launch at the end of June. I'd like to thank the Mayor for attending, and huge thanks to the officer teams across the Economic Development and Green Spaces teams for organising everything, and the University for the Creative Arts for providing the venue. Finally, my thanks to Councillor Mirrlees as well for presenting what Waverley has to offer, along with our partners Creative England, who were on hand to demonstrate the new online database that through this council, local businesses and individuals can access to add details of crew, venues, and any other related resources from security and catering to hotels and B&Bs. This will build up a comprehensive overview of the fantastic resources available here across the borough to filming companies. And finally, Mr. Mayor, the Economic Development team, in partnership with a team from the Department for Work and Pensions, who I can't thank enough, arranged a hugely successful job fair at Farnham Memorial Hall on the 8th of July for our guests from Ukraine. We had about 200 visitors who had the opportunity to speak, some through translators, to representatives from sectors like the NHS, care, hospitality, and several other sectors, including our own Waverley Training Services. I'd like to thank the town and parish clerks for all their help in arranging transport, and also to Cranley Lions, who I know helped out hugely as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That concludes the updates from the executive.
Thank you very much. When you're sitting up here on the platform, you learn something every day. I've just learned what a short holiday is. LPP2 just reminded me of something. My mayor's parlour looks like something from a lazy barrister's anteroom, littered with papers
Apologies.
and badges, and so there'll be no biscuits and cake afterwards, I'm afraid, councillors. Okay, moving on to item 6, questions from members of the public. I don't believe there are any. Correct?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. Questions from members. Item 7, question from members. We have 3. The first one, Councillor Munro, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm very happy not to read the question out in the interests of brevity, because it's on the agenda and everybody has it. But if you'd like to for me to read it out, I will do so.
Although I'm a great believer in brevity, Councillor Munro, I would actually like you to read it so that the hundreds of public who are watching this can know what we're talking about.
I can't possibly refuse that invitation. Thank you very much. Surrey County Council are intending to carry out extensive repairs to boat 520 at Frensham Common in the near future. This has aroused significant opposition amongst local residents and others who have pointed out that the works will cost a great deal of money, cause significant disturbance to wildlife and vegetation in this important triple SI, and in their view are unlikely to achieve their main aim, which is to reduce the adverse impacts of the current intrusive use of the boat and surrounding areas by four-wheel drive vehicles and motorbikes. Local people believe that the best way to control future damage to this environment is through a traffic regulation order. And I completely agree with their assessment. Given that the Council's draft biodiversity policy and action plan rightly emphasises that Waverley-owned and managed sites such as Frensham Common should have their biodiversity protected and, if at all possible, improved, does the portfolio holder agree with a great many local people that Surrey County Council's proposed action is potentially very damaging to the common and that Waverley Borough Council should oppose it? If so, what actions will the council take?
Thank you, Councillor Munro. In the unfortunate absence of the portfolio holder, I think the leader will pick up this one.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Munro. This is the response from the portfolio holder. Councillor Munro is correct that the Council's biodiversity policy and action plan emphasises that Waverley-owned and managed sites such as Frensham Common should have their biodiversity protected and, if possible, improved. Waverley Borough Council recognises the local concerns and will emphasise to Surrey County Council the desirability of a TRO consultation to allow local views to be heard. Waverley is a key stakeholder, along with the National Trust being the custodians of the site, and we will of course always seek to influence decision making to ensure that the best interests of this highly designated site are upheld. However, whilst we can attempt to influence and direct SCC and Natural England, we are not in a position to make a decision on this matter for them. Historically, following various meetings concerning the boat that involved Jeremy Hunt residents, SCC and ourselves, there was an agreed approach between all parties. Waverley Borough Council to implement interim measures, SCC to repair the boat, monitor its use, and then if required, seek a traffic regulation order, TRO. As part of the agreed interim measures following the previous meetings, WBC Rangers and its appointed contractors have undertaken those works in June 2021, restricting the width of the boat route and preventing further damage to the surrounding common by installing 184 chestnut posts. To date, these actions have been effective, and over time they will allow the surrounding habitats and species to recover by natural succession and reclaim these formerly damaged areas where the boat had expanded beyond its designated area. While the works proposed by SCC to extensively repair the boat 520 at Frensham Common have potential to be expensive, SCC have yet to share the details of such repairs with us, so we are unaware of what will be proposed as surfacing for the boat and to what extent it will be resurfaced. SCC had indicated the repairs would be started from May 2022, and clearly this has not occurred so far. The matter of funding the boat repairs is entirely an SCC matter to consider, and the main intention is to make the route less attractive and perhaps more boring to drive on for vehicles, thereby reducing its attraction. This would obviously need to be monitored, and it is very clear that antisocial driving is an issue now. In respect of such proposed works being damaging to the environment due to the site's designations, SCC would need to fully consult with Natural England in order to agree the specifications, methods of construction, storing of materials, etc., in such a way as to not damage the surrounding habitats. However, Waverley Borough Council would also seek in this instance to ensure full consultation with local residents, as there is clearly a strong feeling about the nature of the repair of the boat and a very prevalent view that, following the repair, the route should in any case be closed to motorised traffic. And just to give my reassurance, Councillor Munro, I will certainly raise the matter with your Divisional County Councillor, Councillor David Harmer, when I next see him also. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Munro, did you wish to ask a supplementary question, or are you content?
No, I'd say thank you very much for that. I'll digest the reply and take whatever actions I consider necessary. Thank you.
Some Rennies will be supplied. Thank you. The next question is from Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In March 2021, tenants vacated a pleasant two-bedroomed 1970s council property in central Bramley. 15 months later, at the time of preparing this question, the property has still not been reoccupied, although I understand this situation is about to change. Nevertheless, this situation represents the deprivation of housing for a family on Waverley's waiting list and the loss of a rental approaching probably around £8,000. And then moving on to Oxford Ridge Site C, residents have been decanted from the 20 or so old houses that have been demolished, but the complexities of procurement exacerbated by COVID have contributed to extend the total project time by many months. Building is yet to start on the 30 properties planned for this site. Again, we have a situation where residents on the housing waiting list will have to stay there for much longer than we would like. and the HRA is missing out on large amounts of rent, this time running into several hundred thousands of pounds. I haven't delved into the detailed status of other HRA developments and redevelopment projects, but it seems highly likely that there are other delays to other projects. This can be seen from the fact that the financial outturn for 2021-22 for housing delivery presented to the executive in early July was 6.1 million against an approved budget of 18.6 million. This is a 2/3 underspend, so delays must be widespread somewhere. So can members please be told what were the budgeted and actual losses of rental income from houses in the development and redevelopment programme for 2021 to 22? And what are the budgeted and current projected losses for rental income for this current financial year? We're all aware that redevelopment and development projects are not easy to execute, particularly bearing in mind the circumstances over the past 2 years. Nevertheless, the fact that perfectly good houses are standing empty for over a year and that the council is suffering very significant losses of rental income caused by the delays, I would assert call for remedial action and clear communication to members and affected Waverley tenants. So can members please be told what steps are being taken to address these challenges? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Assistance is always on hand. Okay, thank you very much, Councillor, and Councillor Palmer will pick up the answer.
Thank you very much, Councillor Seaborn. The issues you've raised are important, and I want to, with the Mayor's permission, give a slightly more detailed reply than usual. With regard to the first point, the property in question was allocated to a Waverley tenant who is moving from a property that will be demolished in order to enable new development to take place. A considerable discussion has taken place between the council and the tenant to ensure that, as far as possible, the tenant's requirements for their new home can be met. There have been various aids and adaptations that have had to be made, and the council has tried to reasonably accommodate the wishes of the tenant. It is hoped that the move will take place very soon, as you said. Turning to delays in the programme, most of the council's developments are regeneration projects, as you know. These inevitably take longer to bring forward than simply acquiring a clean site and building new homes. Much of the time taken is in working carefully and sensitively with our tenants to ensure they are prepared to move to a decant property while work is being undertaken and then be offered a new home in the development. We are dealing with our tenants' lives at the deepest level here, and many have lived in the same home for a long time. A brand new home is a great incentive to move, but appropriate engagement with tenants is vital. And there have been tenants who are the last to occupy a home on the site earmarked for redevelopment and needed a great deal of care and support to enable them to move. There are also other delays, including the length of time it's taken to secure planning permission and complexities in tendering contracts. We also follow a due diligence process, and we source external scrutiny of financial appraisals and viability to ensure value for money. And this is especially pertinent in light of the impact of build cost inflation on recent tenders. Now, with regard specifically to delays to Site C at Oxford Ridge, the contractors expect to start on site next month. Consideration of the Site C planning application committee was delayed by the requirement to provide additional information for consideration, which had not been previously requested. We issued the selection questionnaire, which is the first stage of the tender, with the scheme subject to planning. And then when consent was in place, we issued the invitation to tender to those shortlisted contractors. We leave the period where the properties can be occupied for as long as possible. Now, the disconnection, stepping up of and other pre-demolition processes do take time. And at Otford Ridge Site C, we decanted tenants and completed this connection process ourselves and tendered for a demolition contractor. We left the site occupied for as long as we could and tendered the build contract with tenants still in occupation. Holding properties when they become available for use under license and leaving the tenants in the properties where they hold the secure tenancies seems to us to be the best route. There's certainty of a home to meet need when we are ready to push the move button, but there is a risk of delay which extends the use under license. And if we don't do this, we risk not finding a home for tenants in time. Could be disastrous. Now, going forward, we're looking at procuring a contractor to complete works to decant and licensed properties so that we are not delayed and our maintenance contractor, Ian Williams, is not pulled away from standard void and repairs work. Now, to respond to your specific questions on rent loss, we budgeted for £144,272 for the year 2021-2022, 144,272. But the actual rent loss was 128,597, which is 15,675 less than forecast. We budgeted for 112,014 for 2022 to 23. Of course, we haven't reached the end of that yet, but the forecast loss is currently 102,652, which, if we meet it, will result in a projected saving of 9,362. We take every possible step to mitigate void loss. For properties that are hard to let or earmarked for demolition and regeneration, there are two ways that we can ensure that as many properties as possible are occupied and rental income is achieved. Clearly, these will be short-term options, but they not only ensure maximum use is made of the home during that period, but also the council receives income and properties that may be empty and are not subject to vandalism. A number of properties are leased to Escal Lettings, a social and ethical lettings agency, offering guaranteed rent and a free management service to landlords across Surrey and southwest London. Escal Lettings works with a number of local councils and supports tenants to establish better financial stability and quality of life. Escal Lettings let to homeless households under assured short-hold tenancies for up to 2 years, and thus provide essential housing for those who would otherwise be in temporary accommodation, including bed and breakfast. Other properties being occupied under the council's Guardian scheme. Those who would otherwise be homeless are offered a home which is due to be demolished under a temporary license. This not only provides a roof over their head, but enables the homes to be lived in and looked after. All guardians have received council tax support and housing benefit. All of them are paying rent and there are no arrears at all to date. Finally, I can give examples of how this works for the benefit of those in housing need and for the council. We've provided accommodation for a single woman expecting a child, 2 single mothers, each with 2 children, a single father with 2 children, and 3 single people with complex needs. 4 homeless households occupying homes under the Guardian scheme have moved on to secure social housing, and that's the aim for the remaining licensees. We will continue to use as many homes as we can to provide short-term accommodation, working with our guardians to ensure they can move to longer-term, secure and affordable housing. I do assure you that the housing service works tirelessly to ensure that all homes are occupied wherever possible and loss minimized. but officers would be delighted to meet you and any other councillors with a particular interest in this to discuss the way in which this is done and whether it can be further improved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. The next question I have is Councillor Hyman.
I'm glad I didn't put in my 25-minute long question then, Mayor. The Council's duty to protect the endangered habitats and species of the SBAs, as confirmed in the 2018 People over Wind and Sweetman ruling, is set out in simple terms within the 2019 National Planning Practice Guidance on Appropriate Assessment, reference 65006, which concludes that, and I quote, "Competent authorities must now assess the robustness of mitigation measures through an appropriate assessment." Will you, as Mayor, please clarify for residents that, as Natural England have confirmed to the Joint Strategic Partnership Board, that they are still unable to provide evidence of the effectiveness of their SANG and SAM mitigation strategies, and hence no complete appropriate assessment yet exists, that habitats applications cannot therefore be lawfully consented? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Although your question was addressed to me, I shall have great pleasure in passing it on to the portfolio holder, Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Planning Authority have sought confirmation from Natural England following the JSPB meeting. Natural England have not changed their position on the effectiveness of SANG and SAM and have reviewed appropriate assessments undertaken by the Council since the JSPB and continue to raise no objection to the detail within them. The Planning Authority will continue to keep our appropriate assessments up to date, and where there is additional information, we'll look to incorporate it within the document. We will also continue to seek Natural England's advice, as Natural England are the nature conservation body for the purposes of the habitat regulations. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. We will now move on to item 8, and I'm delighted to say there are no motions. So we will move to item 9, minutes of the executive. Leader, would you like to present those? And if you wish, please feel free to use the lectern on high table.
Good evening, members. Mr. Mayor, I would like to present and to introduce the minutes of the executive from the 3rd of May, 7th of June and 5th of July. I believe I have a seconder for those minutes.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. The first item, 9.1, the tenancy strategy. This is a matter that has been before the Housing Landlord Services Board. With your consent, Mr. Mayor, I would ask Councillor Rivers to introduce this item.
Go ahead.
That's very kind, Mr. Mayor, but I think Councillor Palmer is going to do it.
We look very similar. It's easy, and we're both from Binston, so you know,
the holiday was so short, I've forgotten what he looked like.
The proposal has two main objectives. Councillors will have seen the details in the papers, but it may be helpful to pick out main points. First, currently, we define affordable rents in line with national practice at 80% of market rents. For tenants receiving housing benefit, this can be possible to meet, but if they are earning just enough to cease to be eligible for benefits, then they still have little chance in our area of affording even 80% of market rents. Consequently, there's an unintended incentive not to be in work, since that may lose you the benefit and in due course make you unable to afford the rent, so you also lose the home. Consequently, the executive has decided to set the rate at 70% of market rent for 1 to 2 bedroom houses and 65% for larger properties. The objective is simply to make so-called affordable homes more genuinely affordable in our area for people in low paid employment. Second, at present, a new tenant is given so-called flexible tenancy. Now, this is a temporary arrangement during which the tenants cannot be sure that they will be allowed to stay. The original idea, I think it was from 2014, was that this would help councils move tenants on if they no longer seem totally in line with the criteria. However, in practice, the effect has been to increase stress on tenants and, particularly important, to reduce their commitment to the home. And it's not been found that the flexible tenancies actually serve a useful practical purpose. Councillors will be aware that I'm not perhaps one of the most enthusiastic supporters of government, but we should give them credit when they change their minds. And in this case, they've come to feel that flexible tenancies are not the appropriate measure to assist the objectives. So government advice is now that flexible tenancies are no longer recommended because it's recognised by the government that it's important to have settled communities confident that they'll be able to stay. Consequently, we propose to abolish the flexible tenancies. We consulted tenants widely on this, and 97% support the change.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions, comments? In that case, I will put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? Thank you. That is unanimous. Carry on, Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 9.2, the Godalming Regeneration Project. I believe I have a seconder for that item. Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. I imagine this item is going to generate somewhat more debate than the previous one. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I will ask Councillor Merriweather to introduce this item, and I will, I'm sure, take questions when they come.
If you're sure he's the right chap, we'll let him go.
Well, we'll leave that to the side. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I refer colleagues to the report on pages 45 to 52 of your packs, and gently note that at the outset that some elements of this project remain exempt because, for example, they include commercial or otherwise confidential information. Before I remark on the more substantive recommendations, can I also draw your attention to paragraph 3.1, which explains the reasons for recommending the project's change of name. The more substantive recommendations centre on agreeing to fund the next phase of this project, phase 3, which includes both internal work and public engagement, and which is needed to inform the final proposals that will eventually be brought to Council for approval and will go out for more formal consultation. Turning first to the timeline on page 49 of your packs, of course, this doesn't cover all of the preparatory work done by us and our predecessors on this project. Even before 2019, it was generally accepted that the council offices in the Berries were neither financially nor environmentally sustainable. And the council had already started identifying options for their redevelopment together with other sites in the town centre, including others not in scope now. Our own work since has validated not only that the status quo is not an option, but also recasts that challenge within whatever opportunities it affords to pursue our own strategic priorities for our residents. So you'll recall that our first so-called phase 1 study from August 2021 gathered concepts that were at least considered possible and established preliminary metrics against which these broad concepts could be measured. These metrics included financial viability, housing provision, planning viability, environmental sustainability, not to mention others, of course, including car parking neutrality. The phase 1 study identified 14 broad concepts across the 3 sites, and condensed the 72 permutations of them down to 10 conceptual candidates. These were tested further, leading to the elimination of some solutions which, for example, not able to satisfy basic metrics like planning requirements, and the scoring of all remaining options against the critical success factors. There were 3 clearly highest scoring candidates, and these were advanced to phase 2, which involved more detailed refinement of the broad concepts themselves and further analysis of them around viability, zoning, and deliverability on critical success factors, and also a dedicated work group involving representation from Godalming Town Council, focused specifically on car parking neutrality. The 3 inputs evolved into 9 more detailed concepts, which across the 3 sites amounted to 27 permutations. Now, this is an iterative process, and phase 3 work will address the matters identified in paragraph 4.6 of your report, which is set out across pages 47 to 48 of your packs, which, as you'll see, includes engagement with the public, for example, on the project generally and the relative importance of housing and car parking, and further development of the detail on which more definitive financial analysis depends. Finally, I note that on phase 3 will be funded from what's currently called the Property Investment Reserve, which was established precisely for funding this kind of preparatory work on this kind of project. So I think I and the executive and the officers are extremely grateful for the constructive comments and contributions we've received, both from members here, not only in overview and scrutiny, but also in the all-councillor briefings we've held, and also from the members of Godalming Town Council as well. Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillors, Peter Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am opposed to the executive recommendations to this full council on this agenda item. I believe this proposition is deeply flawed and frankly wrong. All options under consideration involve the loss of parking provision in Godalming, though this is not clearly laid out in the paper before us. I wish, Mr. Mayor, to broadly repeat the objections that I made at the Resource Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 20th of June. Whilst I am in favour of the redevelopment of the Berries site, and while I believe that a reasonable case can be made for the redevelopment of the Wharf car park site, I am not in favour of the development of the Crown Court car park site. Specifically, I oppose the building of houses or apartments on the main public car park in Godalming, and I oppose any reduction in the car parking provision. I do not believe that a case has been made for housing to be built at Crown Court car park, other than the general assertion that we need more housing. Crown Court provides 57% of the publicly available car parking provision in central Godalming, excluding the Berries weekend parking here. I do not accept any assertion that Crown Court is an underutilised asset. I believe that car parking will continue to recover to perhaps pre-COVID levels. Any loss of car parking in Crown Court car park, in my view, will be unacceptable. Housing development at Crown Court car park must inevitably lead to the loss or partial loss of the main car park in Godalming. The impact on residents and in turn on local businesses will be very great, and I believe will be unacceptable. I doubt the assertions and assumptions on which the administration bases its belief that the impact on parking provision can be contained. The administration also proposes the building of additional car park capacity at the Berries here to attempt to alleviate any loss of car parking at Crown Court. That can only mean a multi-storey car park close to the edge of the Godalming Conservation Area and overlooking the historic Lammas lands. Such a development will be aesthetically and environmentally unacceptable. In addition, the ease of parking will be greatly diminished. It is a great deal easier for the elderly, the disabled, and those with small children to park on a single level than to have to drive up and down multi-story ramps, park, wait for lifts, and then have further to walk to access the high street shops. These proposals, Mr. Mayor, are not good for our residents and will be bad for business and for enterprise. I do not, therefore, accept the proposal to spend 164,000 of council taxpayer money, equivalent to an increase in council tax of more than 1.5%, on what I believe to be a flawed scheme. I urge fellow councillors, Mr. Mayor, to vote against the three recommendations, and in particular to vote against the idea that this is a Godalming regeneration project. I think it will be better described as a Godalming degeneration project. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I too am unhappy with this project, but for a more financial and informational reason. At the recent Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I pointed out that we had had no information on the revenue side of this project. Capital and revenue are two different sides of every project, and the capital side is not something that tends to give rise to immediate problems. You can always give the value of the new asset whatever you paid for it. But the revenue side is different, especially when we are being constantly and correctly told that we are in revenue stress. And that is why I was keen to know that some high-level preliminary revenue numbers had been carried out to make sure it made sense to spend £164,000. And Councillor Merriweather, to his credit, promised me that these would be made available. And if they had been, I would not be stating what I am now. I have asked the head of finance, who did not know. Another member of his staff was working on it, and I spoke to that member of staff as well, but that too, member of staff did not know either. And other officers who might have known were not available. And we can reduce this actually to a very simple equation. You need to know what the additional costs of the project are and what the additional income or perhaps negative costs savings are. And as far as I can tell, and no one has contradicted me on this, there are only three main elements to this project. The first is the savings on the admittedly high cost of maintaining and heating this building. But those costs, even in today's inflationary times, only amount to about £500,000 per annum. And a new building will still have some maintenance costs, albeit far less, and it will still have some heating costs. You cannot hope to save the whole amount. And a reasonable estimate would be just under half of that, £200,000. As has been pointed out, and as I was glad to see the leader recognise the importance of parking neutrality to ensure that parking income, our single largest income source outside council tax, was not diminished, a multi-storey car park indeed is mooted as the answer to the problem of otherwise losing car parking. And leaving aside the issues of whether it's more or less convenient, and I agree it's less convenient, the point about a multi-storey car park, it's made of concrete, and concrete is porous. And over time, it absorbs moisture and all the chemicals that cars bring into them. And therefore, they need very careful cleaning and maintenance. And a reasonable estimate of what you will pay to maintain a multi-storey car park is 5% of the capital cost. And given that £4.5 million is the capital sum I was given by the head of finance, that works out at £225,000 a year. So you have a saving of £200,000, my estimate admittedly, and a slightly higher cost increase through the multi-storey car park. And then, of course, the third element, which is finance. The project size is anywhere around 20 million, and it'll be at least 3% per annum, or 600,000, in order to finance it. So my concern, Mr. Mayor, is that we have a sum where we are going to lose, in my estimate, about 600,000 a year, we will pay £164,000 to, among other things, find out that we can't afford it. I think we should knock down, develop the housing, and in a buyer's market, find ourselves an appropriate office. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Martin, Michaela. No, sorry. Sally, I apologise.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This proposal sounds excellent to me. As soon as you said more housing, you had my vote. We know in Waverley we have a shortfall on our housing requirements, and this has had a detrimental effect in Farnham, where I live, and in particular in North Farnham. We're seeing a large number of predatory developers come in and build houses all over the place in lovely greenfield sites which are being tarmacked over. To see a brownfield site sensibly redeveloped with city centre apartments which reduce the need for cars is very, very encouraging, and I will support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Neil.
Thank you, Mayor. I share the concerns of my ONS members in group that I'm in. Being a Farnham councillor, I accept this is probably more of a concern to the Godalming councils than us, but I'll nevertheless give you a couple of views from over the hill. 3 points really. On the housing front, I do wonder if it's a bit of an indulgence today to be thinking about building conventional houses and gardens on prime land in the town centre. I would have thought town centres need to be focused on building apartments, for which there's also a demand, as we've seen in Farnham. And some of those people are less likely to come with cars. So if we want more town centre residential, I would have thought sites for apartments, maybe the Wharf Road one is suitable for that, but I'm less supportive of the one in the Crown Court car park. And conversely, of course, the new houses would mean probably should be on land which is outside the town centre. In terms of town centre land use, well, this is precious space, it seems to me, the Crown Court car park, and perhaps should be reserved for green space or buildings that enhance the community and attract visitors. That might be retail in the future, hospitality, or whatever comes along in the future, and maybe we should make sure we keep some space available. And of course, if we did do things for the community, that would make Godalming a better place to live and enhance the economy at some stage in the future. And my third point relates to car parking and travel. It seems to me that our 4 towns are the key hubs for everyone who lives in Waverley, many of whom live in the rural areas. So it is vital that car access and parking is maintained for the foreseeable future. And it seems to me not too smart if we find that people can't park when they arrive here and hence have to go somewhere else. And it's difficult for us to, forecast exactly what the numbers are going to be in a few years' time. At the same time, of course, active travel and public transport needs to be encouraged for all the good reasons of reducing car use, climate change, and personal fitness. So I think that the aspects relating to car parking and the general travel situation is important. What I'm saying reflects to a certain extent what we are doing in Farnham. We've got lots of car parks in Farnham. We're not considering closing any of those at the moment because we still want to make sure that our rural people can get into the town. That's the situation there. And I just think perhaps we should consider that from this council's point of view in respect to Godalming as well. Thank you.
Any more comments? Any more comments, councillors? Councillor Hyman.
Thank you. I've been very concerned by some of the things that I've heard Councillor Mulliner say, and he's covered a number of the concerns and issues that I've had with this throughout. I perfectly understand Councillor Martin's position in respect of building housing in the town centre and on the car park. And what Councillor Neil has said, I would agree with in respect of that we would probably be better to have commercial or tourism or leisure, whatever facilities there, rather than housing, if we are definitely doing it for the town and for the good of the town, rather than simply serving ourselves in trying to ameliorate the cost of replacing the council offices. Now, the issue, as far as I'm concerned here, is whether we're going to be going out to the public and consulting with them on a level of truthfulness, which is where we have to start. And at the moment, as my question at the beginning of the meeting, well into the meeting actually as it was, but my question wasn't answered, and it remains, and it dictates what we're doing on this site as well, because we cannot lawfully place housing on this site unless we've got an assessment which shows that it will not result in a cumulative impact that requires that we refuse consent. We must not grant consent. So my question, I suppose, is, will the consultation admit to the public that in the absence of an appropriate assessment of the cumulative impacts, housing on this site cannot be lawfully consented? Because if we're going to go out to the public and constantly be evading the truth, placing Natural England above the law when there's just a government body whose position has been found by the courts to have been unlawful throughout, yes, the government wants us to do what they want, but we are bound by the law. We should be doing things properly. And I want to know, are we going to start telling the truth when we're going out to consulting people on issues like this? Because if we're not, then, which direction is this council headed? I see a future for this council, but only, with all the pressures that are on for saving money in government. We've got to be showing that we're providing a valuable and trustworthy service for our customers and for our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Goodrich, were you?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was very pleased to hear what Councillor Neil had to say. But I think really one of the jewels of Godalming is the Crown Court car park, the vistas through Crown Court from the High Street across to the Lammas lands. And that has been there for generations and centuries. And the prospect of developing that area and developing houses, it may well be that we want more housing in the Godalming town centre. That doesn't mean the very core of the town. There's a lot of development occurring already in Cattershall Lane and other places that are close to the centre of the town. And indeed, it seems to me that the solution has always been to actually move ourselves from this building and maybe buy an office in Cattershall Lane or something like that, and preserve the Borough Hall and the stone building, and maybe to redevelop the development that occurred back in the 70s and 80s. But the prospect of us losing valuable housing, valuable car parking in Godalming does fill me with horror. And I'm sure that the Chambers of Commerce and the local residents of Godalming would be appalled at this prospect. I don't know, £164,000 does seem an awful lot of money to me. And I don't know whether the leader has any breakdown of that, because it seems to me we're paying an awful lot of people an awful lot of money in fairly quick time to sort out what, in my book, is just unacceptable. Would the people of Farnham like their central car park developed into housing? I doubt it. And certainly we in Godalming would not want it. And I've lived or worked in Godalming most of my life. And I think this is a bad idea from beginning to end. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Townsend. Liz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd just like to say to Councillor Hyman, you can carry on going on about Natural England. However, we've looked into every single matter. If you don't like the way Natural England are doing things, you need to contact Natural England. And to be honest, you know, you've had lengthy replies on this subject again and again and again. I'm not sure what Councillor Martin's talking about, it being deeply flawed, this plan. And I'm not sure whether he attended any of the briefings or the ONS committees. I really don't know, because he talks about losing all the car parking in almost a sense of hysteria entering the chamber here. You know, we are looking at developing a brownfield sites in Godalming. And this will bring in extra customers into local shops. Instead of enjoying the vistas in the car park, residents might be able to enjoy the vistas across the Lammas land. You know, talking about we don't want multi-storey car parks. Well, to be honest, when I had young children and it was pouring with rain, I was quite glad to park in multi-stories, so I didn't have to get them in and out of the car in the pouring rain, load my shopping in the back in the pouring rain. When it's boiling hot, they stay quite cool, multi-stories, so they do have benefits. Giving so much over to the car and saying valuable car parking when we need valuable housing as well, and town centre housing as well, where people are near to amenities, where they are near to a train station, I think is a really, really positive thing. Outlined in this report, which is excellent, and the phase 3 outline shows all of the work that is going to be carried out. And I think this shows how deeply investigative this process is, how much ground is being covered, how the permutations are being looked at. I should think this council should be thanking Councillor Merriweather and officers for the attention to detail and the care that they are taking over this project. It clearly says on point 4 on page 48 that they're going to outline the strategy for the 3 sites. They're looking at the viability, the overall viability. You know, they're looking at the costs and methods of delivery. You know, everything will be covered. I can accept that change is difficult, but if you said to most of our residents, should we be looking at developing a brownfield site in the middle of a town, or would you like more housing on green fields? I think I know what my residents in Cranley would say. I think this is an innovative scheme. It's a progressive scheme. It's an exciting scheme. And I think it gives time for the residents to look at this and to be able to have time to look at the options and for them to come back to us and say what they think about it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. Taking up Councillor Martin's point, where he says a bit dismissively that he hasn't heard any arguments beyond the general statement that we need more housing. This is the crucial issue which a great many residents in Godalming feel. They have children leaving their homes as they grow up, because they are unable to find anywhere local that they can afford to live. In addition, the environmental benefit of having homes in the town centre is very much in accordance with our recognition of the climate emergency. We really need to focus on the need for as many affordable homes which don't require car commutes as possible. And this scheme gives an opportunity to go some way to meeting the real unmet demand that people across Godalming constantly tell us about. I believe that the majority of local people will feel this is the right priority. And I look forward to the discussion in the coming months.
Thank you. Councillor Hess.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of my fellow members earlier, can't quite remember who it was, said, would Farnham like the central car park to be built over? And I think I'm ward councillor for Castle Ward. I think I can comfortably speak for the people of Farnham and say, no, they would not. Definitely not. So here's a scheme how many car parking spaces will Godalming lose? Has undercroft car parking been considered, or underground car parking? Because at the end of the day, like all the other towns in Waverley, we're all facing government housing numbers. There will be new housing in and around Godalming. That means more people coming in, unfortunately, by car. It'd be nice if they came in by bike or other means, active transport, but a lot of them will come in by car and they will need car parking. Even if they go green with e-cars, they're still vehicles, they have to be parked. So I'd be interested to know how many car parking spaces this proposal takes away, given that there is an increasing need for additional capacity for car parking, I would think, with new development around the area. So the two things are not compatible. So has undercroft parking been considered, or dig down like the Germans and a lot of the Europeans would do? They'd spend a lot of money and dig out and build an underground car park, or at the very least undercroft, to retain the capacity. So does anybody in the chamber know if there are a lot of car parking spaces under this proposal and how many would be lost, and whether undercroft car parking has been considered? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands. Sorry, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. I've been in this locality in Godalming and Farncombe for just over 40 years. I've seen a lot of changes, a lot of them not for the better. I really don't think that the Crown Court car park is an item of beauty. It's an item of utility. I think it would be improved with some housing. Now, my understanding of this scheme is the aim is not to lose parking. So I don't really think you can make an argument that we're going to lose parking, because I'm sure that the residents, when they're consulted, will say, oh, we like that one because we've still got all the parking. And the other side of the coin is this wonderful building is costing our residents a fortune. We have to do something. We can't sit back and not let it happen. We have to do something about it. So I am for this scheme, to look at it and see how many really good schemes come forward to put to our residents. So I am very much for it. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Beeman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a simple question. If the public consultation reveals that the public of Godalming do not want the Crown Court car park to become housing, will that be taken full account of?
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark, I'm not used to you being sent to the back of the class.
Well, I've been misbehaving again, Mr. Mayor. It's the first time I've ever heard a car park described as a crown jewel. Perhaps we should build some bays for coaches to cater for the tourists that might visit this destination. Seriously, it's a well-known fact that one of the best ways to regenerate a town is to build homes in the town centre. I understand as well that with regard to car parking, it will be a car parking neutral project. And I think the decision won't be in our hands, it will be in hands of the public when we go to a consultation. But I will certainly support this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Mayor. I would support this. I think we need to look into what we can do to actually help Godalming. And somebody poo-pooed regeneration of Godalming. I think it would be a regeneration of the Godalming town centre. We would be making the best use of the opportunities that we actually have available around us. We've only got to walk up the high street at the moment and we'll see many shops are closed, and that's very sad to see. Housing on any or all of the identified sites will keep young people in the town. This can only help, and that would be good for business. People have also said multi-storey car park, as if they're thinking about those huge things that you see in London. I'm sure that is not what's going to be identified for Godalming. If we look at somewhere like Hazelmere Station, when they said they were going to build a multi-storey car park, everybody went, oh my goodness, that would be horrendous. You hardly notice it because it's low level. And I think multi-stories, as Councillor Townsend said, actually are a benefit. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I feel that we must go ahead and proceed with phase 3 and the funding for it. Councillor Mulliner at the outset has pointed out that there are a considerable number of uncertainties, for example, on the income side, and also queried the cost of doing the phase 3, £164,000. These things do cost money. We don't necessarily have to spend all of it. The money should be set aside so that we can have the additional information so that we can make the right decision at the end of phase 3. I think, you know, the debate, the executive is asking us for the money to proceed. Let's go ahead and do that.
Thank you, Councillor. I see no more hands, so would the leader like to sum up, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Several councillors put this best, but Crown Court clearly is a tourist destination that I had missed as the ward councillor, certainly. I'm sure we'll see it somewhere compared to Frensham as Godalming's best kept secret. Peter Martin, Councillor Martin, you again opposed this. It's flawed, it's wrong. You've read that statement now several times, despite the fact that the debate has moved on. The scheme clearly intends to be parking neutral as a project, which you acknowledge in the second paragraph of your own statement. In opposing this particular set of recommendations, you're actually opposing further engagement with residents on the subject and further investigation of the scheme, yet at the same time bringing nothing, no other options to the table in a situation where doing nothing is a luxury that none of us have. Perhaps you have more inside information than I do, and one of the PM candidates who are promising to slash taxes left, right and centre will be sending you out a sapling of the new magic money tree that's going about, and they can give us a little bit of a hand. Just a thought on multi-stories, which I think at most, if we were ever going to do this, would be at most the height of the berries as it currently stands. Speak to residents in Godalming, speak to parents, speak to disabled residents. They want more of those sorts of spaces. Councillor Townsend elucidated about having children and needing the space in things like the rain and so on. Having a ground floor that is bigger can give more of those sorts of differential spaces for people that need them. Godalming could do with that. A ground floor, well, let's just take a look at the green wall at Brightwells as well. Multi-storey car parks don't actually have to be the monolithic concrete blocks of Milton Keynes and other places. They can be something different, and I'm keen to see how that looks when it's done. Councillor Mulliner, none of us needed you for us to recognise the unfortunate necessity of parking neutrality from a revenue perspective. In a moment, with your consent, Mr. Mayor, I'll ask Councillor Merriweather to comment on some of the other matters. But in fairness, I will carry on then. Councillor Dixon, I completely agree with you. We frequently discuss negative aspects of housing right around the borough, the wrong housing, the wrong size, no infrastructure. What we're talking about here is a sustainable location, a brownfield location, close to various travel options. I myself live fairly close to this entire site. It is a good place to live. It has access to transport, it has access to the shops. Councillor Neil, the tenure mix and type of housing is something that I'm actually very keen to hear about from residents. It's one of the things that I know we'll be asking about, and I absolutely know the people of Godalming will be telling us about. And Councillor Hyman, and I think Councillor Beeman as well, we're actually proposing this pre-engagement consultation as a separate entity from the formal planning consultation, because we want to have that more free-form exchange of views for the people of Godalming. And certainly as the ward councillor for this area of Godalming and also leader of Godalming Town Council, there is absolutely no way that we won't be taking those views very seriously in all of those places. Councillor Goodridge, can I suggest that you take a visit to Cattershall Lane as it is today? Have a look at all of the apartments that now exist where there used to be offices that your government's permitted development rights have done to that commercial property. I've actually lived in one of those monstrosities. They are awful, but there is not certainly large offices on Cattershall Lane that we can just decamp to at no notice. They are almost all gone. Councillor Hess, underground car parking. Certainly that was one of the things I wanted to see considered first as well. the proximity to the river causes a great many issues in terms of underground car parking, but also in terms of viability of the project. If you start doing that sort of thing, it also rules out some of the more obvious things that we might do with the project because of its closeness to the flood zone. It is also why, for example, adding things like Surrey County Council's building at Godalming Library, which is even closer to the river, start becoming more complicated. There is more detail on that subject. Very happy to go through with it with you, and I'm sure Councillor Merriweather is too. And I think really that's all from me. I'll say thank you to the team for all of their work on this. Thank you particularly to the portfolio holder for his personal engagement with everybody here on this on multiple occasions, and also with Godalming Town Council, who were very happy to give their views as they always are. I obviously commend this scheme going forward. We do not have a luxury of doing nothing. We're proposing to bring options to the people of Godalming. I do consider this a regeneration project for Godalming. I'm going to spend tomorrow enjoying the sunlit vistas of Crown Court Car Park, just to check I'm not missing anything before I come back and have another look at this. But for right now, I fundamentally and wholeheartedly endorse these recommendations to you all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Mayor, I'd like to request a recorded vote, please.
Very well. Do I have 5 members supporting? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 and a half. Thank you very much. We will have a recorded vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors, when I call your name, please confirm whether you wish to vote for, vote against or abstain. Councillor Baker.
For.
Councillor Beeman.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Coburn.
Against.
Councillor Darcy.
For.
Councillor Davidson.
For.
Councillor Denis.
Against.
Councillor Dixon.
For.
Councillor David Else.
Against.
Councillor Jenny Else.
Against.
Councillor Follows.
For.
Councillor Forojewski.
Against.
Councillor Gale.
For.
Councillor Goodridge.
Against.
Councillor Hegan.
For.
Councillor Henry.
Against.
Councillor Hess.
For.
Councillor Hunt.
For.
Councillor Hyman.
Abstain.
Councillor Keane.
For.
Councillor MacLeod. Councillor Penny Marriott.
For.
Councillor Peter Marriott.
For.
Councillor Michaela Martin.
For.
Councillor Peter Martin.
Against.
Councillor Merriweather.
For.
Councillor Mulliner.
Against.
Councillor Munro.
For.
Councillor Neal.
Abstain.
Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Palmer.
For.
Councillor Rivers. Sorry, Councillor Paul Rivers.
For.
Madam Deputy Mayor, Councillor Penny Rivers. Councillor Rabini.
For.
Councillor Sadler.
Against.
Councillor Seaborn.
Abstain.
Councillor Liz Townsend.
For.
Councillor Philip Townsend.
For.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Ward.
For.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my apologies. Councillor Julian Spence.
For.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's 27 for, 10 against and 3 abstentions.
Mr. Wilson was missed out.
Oh, sorry, and Councillor Wilson. My apologies.
Very much for.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's 28 for, 10 against and 3 abstentions.
That is therefore carried. Let's move on to the next item. Leader, are you going to introduce?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe I have a seconder for this item 9.3.
Please to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Mr. Mayor, I'd first of all like to thank our officers for the significant work that has been undertaken to get this report to this point. In many respects, a natural consequence of the local government boundary review that was essentially opposed on us earlier this year and late last year. Annex 1 of this document outlines the final proposals that we're seeking to implement. They follow extremely constructive consultations with the towns and parishes of Waverley, their members, and of course, members here. It is my distinct hope that we have a document here that is acceptable to all members, and it certainly seems to be acceptable to the vast majority of the towns and parishes of Waverley, with some very small exceptions, many of which have been dealt with by our officers. I don't believe I need to say any more, as we've been through this document a number of times now, and it's certainly my pleasure to commend it to you all.
Thank you, Leader. Do I have any speakers? In that case, is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you, councillors. Let's move on to item 9.4.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 9.4, the financial outturn 21-22. I believe I have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. And with your consent, Mr. Mayor, I would like to hand over to Councillor Merriweather for this item.
Councillor Merriweather, you may go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and referring colleagues now to pages 101 to 118 of your packs. The item asks us to note the financial outturn positions for fiscal 21-22 for both the general fund and the housing revenue account, and to agree recommendations consequent to them and other emerging pressures and threats to our general fund, medium-term financial plan and HRA business plan. Turning first to the general fund, it's understandable that during another pandemic year, there was some in-year volatility affecting the budget originally approved in February 21, but we were not only able to contain adverse impacts, but in fact deliver an underspend in outturn against the final approved budget after the carry forward of approved budget spends into this year. In particular, the use of car parks started to recover sooner than estimated, and as a result of close monitoring by officers, staff costs were contained below budget. But looking forward into this year and beyond, what was just a malign threat of inflation has turned into a more severe reality, and in tandem with other non-financial supply side issues affecting goods and labor, and all in a world where COVID remains stubbornly defiant, if not resurgent. So I draw your attention to section 6 of your report, where we make recommendations that are intended to recalibrate some of our reserves as part of our ongoing preparations for these challenges over the medium term, and that are already even more severe than we imagined less than a year ago. These reserve reviews are only part of the work underway to seek sustainable general fund measures that will at least offset perennially rising cost pressures. Because of the volatile macroeconomic situation, and especially those elements identified in section 7 of your report, we're proposing to have a further mid-year review of the medium-term financial plan later in the year. Turning next to the housing revenue account, where again, the containment of staff costs made the most significant contribution to an overall underspend, despite relatively small variances in rents and higher utility costs. The HRA is, of course, not only subject to the same economic factors as the general fund, but also, as you may know, the HRA business plan is also already under a strategic review. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillors. Any comments? Councillor Beeman.
Thank you very much. Just a short question. Waverley is dependent a lot on council tax revenue and has enjoyed a high rate of collection in the past. Is there any indication from the recent cost of living crisis that these collection rates have been affected? Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. I'll take councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A simple question, because you like them short. On page 111, I couldn't see the reason. Under the heading audit, we have an approved budget of 14,122, which seems to have been turned into a profit situation of 25,164. Now, I may have misunderstood that, but I can't quite see how under audit you can actually make money. But perhaps I could be advised how this can be done.
Thank you, councillor. Any more councillors? Do you wish to sum up, Leader, or do you wish to pass that to Councillor Merriweather?
I'm afraid I'm going to follow your example of old and pass to the Chancellor.
Thank you very much. The council tax collections we are keeping under very close watch. And I hate to say that this, but as of now, it's probably still too early to say. Residents are receiving some support from the government, but to the extent that there is a material and sustained downturn, we'll let you know. These are the factors that we're going to be reviewing later in the year. Councillor Goodridge is right. There is on page 1.1 a so-called projected budget surplus, but the rest of the report describes how that is appropriated across other reserves, if I can use that word. And I'm happy to get him a written answer explaining how that works.
I think he'd be delighted to hear that, in case we've got a magic money tree too.
I wish.
Very well. Councillors, I see no more hands. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next item, 9.5, I believe. Just before we do, let me remind you that this item is pulled forward from our last meeting, where it was agreed to delay it because certain bits of paper were not where they should be. So, Leader, please introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to ask, with your indulgence, that Councillor Penny Marriott introduce this item, and I'm sure there'll be opportunities for questions too. Thank you.
Councillor Penny Marriott, go ahead.
Thank you, Leader, Mr. Mayor. There's this report you have in front of you and its associated annexes set out the new equalities, diversity and inclusion policy for the council. It also, more importantly, sets out our objectives in order to try and push these forward, and an action plan which will hopefully also result in it being implemented. Under the Equalities Act in 2010, the council has a number of both general and specific duties. These are legal requirements. In the exercise of their function, the council must have due regard to the need to eliminate unlawful discrimination, harassment and victimization and other conduct prohibited by the Act, advance the equality of opportunity and outcome, which isn't there but should be, between the people who share a protected characteristics and those who do not. And they should foster good relations between the people who share the protected characteristics and those who do not, tackling prejudice and promoting understanding. Advancing equality of opportunity is a difficult thing to do, but even more difficult is promoting equity of outcome. The protected characteristics are set down in the Act itself, and they are age, disability, pregnancy and maternity, religion or belief, race, sex, sexual orientation, gender reassignment, and marriage and civil partnership. Now, this is something maybe, and I'm sure most of you could think of other things that you would like to add to this list, and some of which perhaps you do not agree with yourself. But that is the way with this particular topic. There are always going to be those who wish that we would have gone further and those who wish that we hadn't, think we've gone too far. But these are actually laid down in the Act, and therefore to add anything to them would be a difficult thing to justify. In addition to the general duties we have, a local authority also must publish equality information and prepare and publish one or more, with, in this case, a whole new set of equality objectives that we think we can actually do in order to carry out our general equality duty, at least every 4 years. Well, I think before this, there has been quite a long time before they were actually looked at. So they were first published in 2012, and I don't think they've changed very much until now. So this is it's a much needed thing to do. Last year, the Corporate Equality Group, which consists of a member of staff, I myself joined, and we started to develop the set of equality objectives. Collective ideas were refined and then presented to the managers group and lastly to the senior management team, because it's no point in having good ideas if your team do not think that they can put them into practice. The equality objectives recognise that council has a role as a service provider, as an employer, and as a community leader, because we are a service provider, and therefore a lot of the things where we talk about in the objectives and in the action plan are to do with our interaction with the public, as well as our interaction with each other and the staff's interaction. If you look at Annex One, which sets out the corporate equality objectives, it is, I think it was sent to all of you recently because it was not included in the pack, although it should have been, and I didn't want to put this off for another set of meetings. I think that what is more important in some ways than this, and I'm sure that these will be added to as time goes by, was there must be some way of measuring whether there is an impact with some of our policies, with some of our actions, with the way that we do things, which could be impacting adversely on one of the characteristic groups. So as well as putting forward objectives, there is an equality impact assessment form, which means that for every policy, sometimes even before it is put forward, we should look at this and say, does it impact one of the groups which we should be looking after? In lots of ways, well, when you're putting forward equality, diversity and inclusion policy, you really only need, I would say, 3 or 4 words, because you need to be kind, you need to be fair, you need to, oh, good, I can't think 4 words now, but kind, fair, tolerant of other people's views, and also absolutely the opposite of prejudice, unprejudiced, open-minded about other people's views on what you are putting forward. I think that's all I want to say. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. I have Councillor Michaela Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't believe in waffling when a few sentences can put my views across. However, again, women's rights are being sacrificed on the altar of wokeism. Women make up 51% of the population, and it has taken decades for our voices to be heard and recognised, and for women to be taken seriously in the workplace. However, this mandate seriously undermines our rights as women. Here again, we're being regarded as a subgender and pushed to the back of the queue. I am proud to be a woman, spelt W-O-M-A-N, and I strongly urge my fellow councillors to object to this item on the agenda and send it back to the drawing board. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I, of course, welcome this report, and I do know, talking with the portfolio holder, it's taken quite a lot of time and quite a lot of argument to get to this stage. And the last thing I want to do is torpedo it. I want to use this as a foundation for moving on. I think I think it could and should have more teeth to it. I would like to see more specific actions to deal with the huge influx of minority ethnic heritage people into this borough, as one example, and more specific action to deal with our responsibilities as a housing authority. I just use those as two examples, but I look to the corporate equalities group actually to tackle those as well. One thing slightly grates on me, you may think that's a little odd coming from me, is the bullet points at the top of Annex 1 starts with LGBT rights. And that, as I said, slightly grates, following on Councillor Martin's views, which I don't share the vehemence of her views, but I do see what she's getting at. If we're going to have LGBT rights right up there in the bullet points, so why not women's rights? Why not transgender rights? Why not the rights of minority people with minority ethnic heritage? Incidentally, I should say I speak as a trustee of the Surrey Minority Ethnic Forum, and so on and so forth. As I say, I don't want to have this sent back. That's not right, of course, but I hope that the portfolio holder and others will take these into account. I think nearly everybody at Waverley is sincere here in trying to get a good deal for those with protected characteristics. This is a goodish start. It can be improved, so let's make sure we do that. Thank you.
Councillor Jenny Else.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to say I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Martin, and I also agree with Councillor Munro, because it's not just about LGBTQ rights, it's about everybody's rights. And what about men's rights? Why do we have to have that particular point made? I don't think it's 100% necessary, or we have to include everybody. It's just people's rights. We're all people. One thing I would like to say is I think that this protected, can't think what it's called, protective characteristics. Now, I have a really serious hearing problem. I wear hearing aids. I do my very best to hear every word that's said in this council, but I can't hear always. I just would like to let everybody know that your decision not to stand when you speak does me a great disservice. And I'm not saying you should stand if you don't want to, but I just want you to know that that makes me, puts me, sorry, in a very difficult position, because I can't hear most of what you say. When you stand, your voice projects. When you sit, it doesn't. Some of you are much better at speaking out, some of you are not. And I just wanted to ask, Mr. Mayor, does brevity mean speed? Because I would like to ask whether you could have a word with the leader and ask him to slow down a little bit. I actually find enormous he answered questions earlier on in a very slow way, and I understood every word he said. But from there, I couldn't understand a thing. So I don't want to miss things. I really don't. It's important. And everything that everybody says here is important to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I read this report, and thank you very much to my colleague Penny. One penny to another. It's like all things. It'll be a work in progress. It is not set in stone, but I can't see anything at all to object to as that is. It's a work in progress. we all learn different words these days, so I'm going to try this one out in the council chamber. As a cisgender woman, my womanhood is in no way threatened by anybody else's human rights, and that includes the rights of transgender women. So I'm absolutely in favour of this. Thank you very much indeed.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'm going to sit down and see if I can project my voice to an adequate level, because I share Councillor Else's concerns about for those of us who are deaf. I have had difficulties, and because I am deaf, and my deafness is assisted by hearing aids. They are top of the range. I can control different modes via my mobile phone. It does, however, lead to misunderstanding on occasion, because people think that I am fiddling with my phone when in fact I am desperately trying to choose the right channel for hearing, would you believe, an individual voice. So I have in fact written a paper which I have copied to the portfolio holder, and it has been addressed to, I think, Louise Norrie, our very helpful officer, on the difficulties that I have. Because like Councillor Else, I want to hear every word that is spoken in this chamber at every meeting that I attend. So one thing I have discovered is that people who call in to make representations at planning meetings use their own device, very often a laptop. Very often it doesn't have a very good microphone, and there have been occasions when I have struggled to hear a single word from one person making representation about a planning application. So I have left suggestions with Louise Norrie, and I hope the portfolio holder, to overcome these particular problems. I won't go into detail here, it's not appropriate, but I would like to say that I am on the lookout for answers. However, having just flagged up this particular difficulty, I certainly support what is proposed here. It really is enlightened as far as I'm concerned, and it can be developed in the light of experience, and I hope in the light of consultation. So I am going to say yes to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Keane, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I support most of these objectives, and I think I wholeheartedly agree with them. But there is one that I find very difficult to understand. Maybe it's just me, but gender equality and the use of gender neutral language. You know, does this mean that we're now no longer going to be called Mrs. or Mr. or Miss or whatever? You know, perhaps somebody could explain this to me. I know we live in a very different world now, and we have to be mindful and respectful of everybody within our community. But I do wonder how far we are going to go. Are we going to be a chair instead of Madam or Mr., whatever? Perhaps somebody could explain this to me, because I find this very hard to understand. And I think that particular item is going a bit far.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too support these equality objectives, which in fact are there to uphold the provisions of the 2010 Equality Act, some of which, of course, is already enshrined within our corporate strategy. However, I have already noticed some divisions opening up on this subject, and I would urge common sense and consensus in adopting the objectives, as there is always the risk of listening to those who shout or speak the loudest. The objectives simply mirror, as I said, the core principles of the Equalities Act, and there is a clue in the word equality, which will mean that no one group has dominance or preference over another. All will be treated equal. The best parts, to my mind, are in the action plan, which are designed to protect all groups on our payroll from discrimination and harassment, as well as to ensure that any and all of our services do not discriminate unfairly towards any group. So I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Councillor Beeman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I fully support this document, although I've just got one little concern. And I speak as a gay person, a gay man, and I speak as a disabled person because I've had Parkinson's for 22 years, and I also am in my 70th year. But what I would say is this: for employment purposes, I would not like this to see this document used as a basis for having to employ people in set ratios. I think all employment in the local authority should be awarded on meritocracy and the ability to do the job. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any more speakers? Councillor Dixon.
Yes, good evening. I'm going to sit down, but I will project as much as I can, Jenny. I had a trouble with this because my initial thought is, you know, equal rights for women. And as someone who's worked for about 40 years, I've been a lot of jobs where I've been the first woman to do this or the first woman to do that. And you've always felt like you're under a great deal of scrutiny and you had to work extremely hard. But I think what's quite reassuring about this is that one of the things that I think my generation still hasn't overcome is the maternity issue. And a lot of the ladies I know who decided to have children still saw their careers take a back seat for about 10 years. So it's very reassuring to see that maternity is now going to be seen as a characteristic, and people will try not to discriminate against ladies who are trying to take care of small children. So that's great. I also had a chat with my 2 teenage daughters about this. And I said, you know, as a woman, I've been fighting for the rights of women for all my life. And they said, yeah, so. And I think actually I looked at it again and I said, do I really want my rights to exceed those who are in a minority religion? Do I really want my rights to exceed those who are in a minority race? And I think in all good conscience, it's taking a long time. And I think for all of us, we are frustrated by that. There's still more women nurses and more male doctors. Every profession of life, we see, you know, the cleaners are all ladies, and, you know, those statistics go on and on and on, and things never seem to change. But I think things have changed. So I think this is probably a step in the right direction, and I will be supporting this tonight.
Thank you. Any more councillors? Councillor Palmer.
Just very briefly to respond to Councillor Keane. The reason for gender neutral language is that in its absence, there is a danger of unspoken assumptions, and they can have an exclusionary effect. So that if, for instance, we routinely refer to the mayor as he, one might subconsciously start to feel that it was the natural thing for the male to be male. And it's no more than that.
Before I ask the leader to sum up, let me just pick up Councillor Jenny Else's 2 points. Brevity, yes, wonderful. And I absolutely take your point and understand your comment about speed talking rather than speed reading. So I'm sure the leader will take it on board and will moderate his speed accordingly. I sympathize with anybody who has hearing difficulties. I have sight difficulties, which is much easier overcome by just sticking a pair of glasses on and hoping they work. The sitting standing thing was almost a political football a little while ago. People projecting their voices when they stand, yes, I do agree with that they do, but the idea of these things here is that you shouldn't have to shout across the room. These microphones should work. And for some strange reason, in this chamber, we seem to have produced microphones that work better when you're actually sitting down. And in Farnham Town Council, where they do sit down all the time, we have produced microphones that work better when they stand up. So you can't win them all, but I will take on your speed, and I'm sure the leader will. And the number of people who I go to meetings who actually speak over here and wonder why the microphone doesn't quite pick up what they're saying is legion. So please, everybody, speak into the microphone and think of other people. And I hope that will be at least a help on your way. Leader, before you actually sum up, could you just clarify exactly what the recommendation is? Because I'm slightly confused.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, members. As a straight white man under 40, I've actually been very reluctant to weigh into this debate, as you can imagine. But I've done so on a number of occasions, in a few cases with a few specific members, actually because the women in my life asked me to do so for various reasons from different perspectives. I'll try and go through some of the points that councillors have raised, and if I drift too far off the mark, I'm sure somebody will tell me. Councillor Munro, more specific actions, I completely agree with you. Councillor Marriott and I will certainly take that on board. This is meant to be a living document, and I know we'd certainly welcome your input on the corporate equalities group. You have a great deal of experience in these. You work with a great many outside groups on these subjects, and I know that will be valuable input. Councillor Martin, presentation of this document is always going to be an issue, just because when you write something like this, there's going to be a tendency for an implied order of priorities when none is meant. As Councillor Clark has mentioned, much of this just goes back to the Equalities Act. I do think we could present this in a different way to stop there being such an implied hierarchy of rights. But I'll just go, when I get to my concluding paragraph, I will just address another point that you raised a little bit more differently. Councillor Keane, Councillor Palmer's responded a little bit, but for me, it's not a case of enforcing a certain type of language. It's just making sure the council considers that some people might want to be referred to in a different way than we would by default go to. And it's just making sure that the council, at least in its work, doesn't make assumptions. Councillor Else, I will endeavour to speak more slowly. If I'm going too fast for people, please do shout. One of the joys of being under 40 is that most of us speak quite quickly. It's a bit of a cliche, but most of us do. I'd hasten to add that when I stand up, I am significantly further from the microphone. So the default assumption is that people will hear me less when I'm standing. And to refer to a point actually in the document, unseen disabilities is a core of this. Certainly, I remember having discussions with Councillor Gray when it came to sitting and standing in the chamber and how he felt when other people said that it was disrespectful to the mayor if you didn't stand, for example. I had, after extensive flying through work, part of my leg vein removed on my left leg, which means getting up and down every 5 minutes is also quite difficult, and I don't rush to do it. And it's just, there are going to be lots of things like that in the chamber that people have, and maybe they don't want to say, and there are reasons why they don't want to say them. And it's trying to make people feel as comfortable as possible so they can undertake their democratic rights and duties in a way that doesn't make them feel like they're less than anybody else. To respond both to you, Councillor Rouse, and also to Councillor Baker, I know, Councillor Baker, you've certainly had extensive discussions with Democratic Services on this. I very much hope, Councillor Rouse, that you have also. There are plenty of technological things that the Chamber can allow. And going back to the previous discussion on the Berries redevelopment, I imagine if we're refitting this chamber for this year rather than from 30 years ago, there are definitely things that can be built into the facilities to assist in a great many different ways. When I actually first stood as a councillor, I was actually up against a Labour councillor who was disabled and in a wheelchair, and he came in here for a meeting with me and one of the Democratic Services officers at the time, and he couldn't get round the gaps in his wheelchair and all the things that came around the outside of it. The chamber is just not built for that sort of thing, and it's starting to recognise through documents like this those sorts of issues that, not for any kind of malice, we just haven't thought of because it doesn't apply to us in our daily lives. Councillor Beeman, just to confirm, I very much agree with you on this, and I will give you my assurance that it's not to be used for that purpose. And just to everybody here, my final point, the purpose of this document is about promoting equality and not inequality, and the recognition of one group of rights does not remove or diminish the rights of others. It merely articulates the rights of everyone, which is exactly what people have said here. So I do commend this document. I remind everybody that it's a live document. I remind everybody that much of it derives from law in the Equalities Act. The purpose of this, though, is that we grow as a council and start understanding these issues and have a forum to talk about these issues. It is not to diminish the rights of any particular group, merely to enhance the rights of people in general. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I will move. Of all the times I could do that, that would be the one, wouldn't it? Mr. Mayor, I do now move these recommendations. Thank you.
The recommendations are on page 119 for those like me who couldn't find them. Are they agreed?
Mr. Mayor, on a slight point of order, I do this. I wouldn't wish this to be. Yes, I'm not sure this was ever seconded. I don't think Councillor Anne said, let's get that one right.
It was proposed by me and seconded by Councillor Marriott, I believe. But
I apologise. I didn't hear it. I too obviously have a hearing defect.
You do. Okay. Any more points of order? Okay. Is that agreed, ladies and gentlemen?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We now move on to.
Does anybody want to register any dissatisfaction?
Okay. The officers have reminded me I should ask if anybody wishes to register a vote against it. Councillor Martin, Michaela. You don't have to, but it's. Okay, okay, no, sorry, no speech, register against, fine. Anyone else? Okay, no one else? Okay, let us then move on to comments on part 2. I have 2 listed speakers. They are both on strategy updates, and the first is Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've asked to speak on this item following on from comments that I made to the executive at their June 7th meeting. The nature of the procedure for speaking in this council is such that a speaker can make a point, the administration then sets out its response, and that is generally the end of the matter, even if the response doesn't effectively address the comments that were made. In the case of the electric vehicle strategy update, I made the point that the strategy update is largely devoid of any financial information. Good marketing strategy covers 4 aspects: product, place, price, and promotion. In my view, product and place are covered quite well. Price and promotion are almost totally absent in this strategy. The strategy update contains no indicative implementation costs, either to Waverley or to bodies that might provide grants. There are no relative costs for the different types of charges that we might install. There are no indicative internal resource costs for implementing the strategy, and there is no comment on whether the use of charges introduced through the strategy should be subsidised, break even, or even generate a surplus. My comments were in no way judgmental about this strategy being expensive or inappropriate in terms of financial commitment. How could this be? there is no information provided in which to make judgmental comments, and yet the portfolio holder's response included the following comments: a focus on obsessive penny pinching. The implicit response of Councillor Seaborn is that this is all too much. It might cost a little bit of money here and there. The cost is fairly minimal as far as Waverley's contribution is concerned. I'd actually offered a constructive suggestion that the strategy could be improved if officers included high-level indicative financial information in the next version. And I ended up being attacked for being penny pinching and for inferring that the cost of implementing the strategy was too high. I fully accept that this strategy is not a detailed plan and should not contain detailed budget level costings and pricing information. But responsible financial management requires far more indicative cost and pricing material than has been included. Just as we have a serious commitment to address urgent climate issues, an implementation of this strategy should make a welcome contribution to that, though it provides no indication of how much. So the current corporate strategy states, we cannot achieve our priorities without a sound financial future achieved by careful budgeting and a robust medium-term financial plan. So I repeat the suggestion that I offered to the June executive. Next time the strategy is updated, please would officers add in the indicative financial information that will tell us whether this is a £10,000 strategy, a £100,000 strategy, or £1 million strategy, and how much does Waverley plan to spend, and how much will come from external resources. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. The next one I have is Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I read the electric vehicle strategy with interest and am generally very much in favour of electric vehicles. I've had one myself for over three years. But when I read it, I did see one or two things which made me realise that we have a constant danger in this area of climate change policy of, shall we say, over-egging the pudding. And what there wasn't in the strategy was any indication of what degree of carbon dioxide saving we're actually making or could make. Indeed, one of the regular concerns that both I and Councillor Seaborn have had as we've taken an interest in the climate change work of the administration is to get some precision, not just about cost, about the expected savings. And I was interested to see that at page 103 of the executive pack, there is the statement that a study by Nottingham University in November 2020 was that a new car run on petrol traveling 20,000 kilometres a year is responsible for almost 2.5 tonnes of CO2. And encouraging a switch to electric vehicles would have enormous benefits in reducing the carbon footprint in Waverley. Well, unfortunately, it's simply not true. The study is true enough, but if you do the maths, that comes down to 125 grams of carbon dioxide per kilometre. Although I'm very pleased with my electric vehicle, I don't pretend it's got no indirect carbon dioxide costs. And they actually come in at about 100 grams. So it's a much smaller saving compared to a new petrol car than you might think. Now, the general and more generous interpretation is that the majority of cars are, of course, far less efficient than these brand new petrol cars. And the general rubric is that around about 200 grams per kilometre is more of an average. And therefore, electric vehicles save 100 grams per kilometre travelled. But I think we all ought to be aware, if we get into conversation about our policy, what this actually translates to in terms of tonnes saved. And I've now got the figures from the relevant officer of what we have been doing since 2019. I should add, in all fairness, that in fact the three most productive chargers, if you like, are in the three main car parks, and they were actually introduced by Genie Point in September 2019, having been commissioned by the previous Conservative administration under the then Councillor Andrew Bolton. But leaving that aside, there was a slow start. 4,600 kilowatt hours were taken in 557 visits, and that was basically about 5 visits per day all over the borough. Obviously, some charges were never touched. In 2020, which was admittedly the pandemic year, we delivered 24,000 kilowatt hours, and that was over 2,300. And in the current year, my sort of annualization from today is that it'll be about 90,000 kilowatt hours over 5,000 visits, which means that there are about 13 visits all over the borough. And what that means is that over the year, we will save 62 tons of carbon dioxide, which is better than a slap in the face, but one should remember that the borough's emissions are 500,000 and 40% of those are transport, which is 200,000. So this is 0.03%. What I'm asking for is realism and effectiveness in delivering this, and not ideology and emotion. This autumn is going to be troublesome. We're worrying about heat today. It'll be very cold in the autumn and winter, and people will be worrying about their fuel bills. And I think we must be careful not to antagonize the public, who will think that a crisis today is far more relevant than a crisis which we see coming in decades to come. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. That brings us to the end of that item. The proposal was that Council receive and note the minutes of the executive. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. We now move on to item 10, minutes of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the absence of the chairman, I'll present the report from here because the report will be so short it isn't worth the walk both ways.
As your leader insists, I think you ought to have a seconder.
I will get to that. I'm presenting the report of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee of their meeting of the 23rd of May 2022, and I hope to find a seconder, and which I have. There are no items under part 1, and I'm not aware of any questions on part 2, and that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Council, do we agree to receive that detailed report? Thank you very much. We'll now move on to minutes of the Audit Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to propose that the council receive the minutes of the Audit Committee. That was held on 13th of June this year. The minutes are included in pages 137 to 140 in the pack. Again, there are no part 1 items. Should I start? Yes. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Jerome. There are no part 1 minutes to consider, and equally there are no part 2 matters to consider either. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, members. The recommendation or the request is to note and receive the minutes. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. We now move on to item 12. Before we move on to that, I have been asked to draw councillors' attention to various things. So before moving on to this item, I expect 2 of our strategic directors will withdraw, and I believe they have done so. This item is being debated by both Waverley and Guildford Borough Councils. And before we discuss this item, I've been asked by the officers, supported by the Chief Executive, to make some points about the debate and to remind councillors about decisions that council has already taken, which should form no part of tonight's discussions. The appointment of strategic directors is reserved to full council, but to aid us in making these decisions, council has previously resolved to establish a cross-party joint appointments committee with equal representation from Guildford and Waverley to consider this matter and report back to the 2 councils with their recommendations. This has now been done, and it is those recommendations and those recommendations alone that this council is being asked to formally approve. We are not, I stress, being asked to rerun the selection process. The decision to appoint joint positions has already been taken by this council and by Guildford Council, and a joint chief executive is already in post. So it is only the committee's report that we are debating here, and I would ask you to focus on that. There are some pink papers containing personal details about the recommended appointees, which are for councillors' information, but please be circumspect in debate, as I do not wish this item to go into exempt. I now call upon the leader to introduce this item and the recommendation. Thank you.
Before I continue, I'm happy to introduce this item, and I believe I have a seconder.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members. You've said, I think, Mr. Mayor, most of the information that I think really did need to be communicated at the beginning of this session. I had the pleasure of it being my turn to chair the Joint Appointments Committee, a role that rotates between myself and the leader of Guildford. It was a particularly interesting day of interviews. We heard presentations, we saw CVs, we had the opportunity to ask questions in most cases for at least a couple of hours at a time before we had our own deliberations. I believe we had all of the information that we needed to come to a reasonable and sensible decision on those decisions. And realistically, I don't believe there's anything really more I can go into. The Joint Appointments Committee, the JAC, was delegated that power to an authority to review that information and to come to those decisions. I entirely support all of those decisions before you tonight. I'm happy to take questions from members as to any of the process and procedure of those of the Joint Appointments Committee for anybody unfamiliar with it. But I think the decisions were taken with full information and good faith, and I'm happy to continue to support those decisions. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors, are there any comments or questions for the leader? Councillor Mulliner.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor. I'll make one brief comment. I'm happy to support this, but I would draw members' attention to some of the information in the paper in front of us in open. Now, I'll pay particular attention to the fact that neither of the Section 151 officers was a candidate. Now, simply make the comment, Mr. Mayor, that in view of the importance of finance and the sheer complexities of local government finance, I am concerned that we do not have a Section 151 officer currently at the top table. And I've communicated my concerns to the other members of the JAC and to the Chief Executive, and I hope he will take note of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mulliner. I am aware that the Chief Executive has spoken with you about this and is well aware of your concerns. Any more comments or questions? In that case, councillors, sorry, Jenny, my apologies, Councillor Else.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I just, could we be introduced to the lady who's just come in? Because I don't know who she is. I'm sorry, I'd just like to know who's joined us, that's all.
Sally, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, I will. My name is Sally Kipping and I'm the HR manager for Waverley Borough Council, and I had the honour of being the HR advisor at the Joint Appointments Committee. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Apologies, Sally and councillors, I should have introduced you when you so quietly slipped into the room. Councillors, any more? In that case, is this agreed? Thank you very much. We now move on to item 13, review of political proportionality. I will introduce this item. Councillors, this report is as a result of the last by-election. We have an agreement to do political proportionality. I wish people wouldn't make these things that are difficult to pronounce. And this is a purely mathematical calculation that is done by officers. And I hope, councillors, that you will accept that officers, being non-political, have done this correctly and in due faith and will accept the verdict. So, councillors, is that agreed? Thank you very much. We now move on to item 14, overview and scrutiny annual reports. And I believe I have a dual act with councillors Mulliner and Denis, and councillor Mulliner is leading.
Well, Mr. Mayor, in order to keep to your desire for brevity, I'm going to be the only speaker, and I shall keep it fairly brief. And I'll make 3 points. I do recommend that members spend a moment reading the report and take it on board. It was a more variegated year than ever before because we had 4 committees at one stage and then only 2. And I'll make 3 comments. The first comment is that there's been undoubtedly an increase in the concentration of work. You simply can't avoid it. And in partial response to that, the Resources Committee decided to form a housing working group. because basically the loss of the Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee was a blow, and it is a very large and complex subject, and we are fortunate to have had some briefings on it already. The other point is, of course, that we do most of the detailed work outside the formal committee meetings in what can be called task and finish groups or working groups. And among the items that were looked at in that way, you had the Local Plan Part 2, the Dunsfold Supplementary Planning Document, the Cranley Leisure Centre, a particularly effective working group there, and also matters such as the budget. And indeed, housing development, as I mentioned earlier, is something which we're taking a very keen interest in, recognising the challenges the council faces because of steep rises in building costs. And I thank all those members who are prepared to serve on those working groups or task and finish groups, because they're going over and above and delivering very valuable insights for officers and the rest of the council. My last comment is one of disappointment. The biggest single item that we had to deal with was, of course, the local government collaboration, possibly the greatest or largest strategic decision which this council has taken in its history. And yet the opportunity for scrutiny was almost zero. And I hope very much indeed that should anything ever like this happen again on another council, scrutiny would be involved at a very early stage to ask difficult questions and to kick the tires much sooner than actually happened. It was 16th of June when we had the briefing. It was the 6th of July when the definitive decision or substantive decision to go ahead was taken. It was an executive committee shortly after the briefing, and after that, not beforehand, there was one value for money scrutiny committee. It simply wasn't enough, it wasn't good enough. It means that issues which I think are now beginning to surface weren't given a chance to be explored then. So on that note, I would say, please do read this report. It's more interesting than normal. We'll give you an insight what Overview and Scrutiny gets up to. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mulliner. Are there any speakers to this item? Right, I will assume, since I introduced it as a double act, that Councillor Denis is seconding it. And I assume you won't wish to sum up, seeing as there aren't any more. So,
unless you wish me to.
How could I resist? Councillors, is that agreed? Very well. We come to the last item on the agenda, and I have been asked just to read this out. I must say I hate red ink. Councillors, we now come to the final thing, which is a report from the Standards Committee, which met on the 28th of June. It is reported to Council in accordance with the arrangements for hearings of Standards Committees by the Council. The readings are written in your report. I don't wish to read them out, and I doubt that there will be any speakers to this item. In that case, councillors, do we accept this and agree it and note it? Thank you very much. And I believe that is the end of the meeting, and it's long away from my estimate, but very close to the Deputy Mayor's estimate. It's only about a minute out. So, councillors, thank you for your forbearance in the evening, and a pleasant journey home.
Please rise whilst the Mayor leaves the chamber.